The president has several powers that are independent of Congress, which can be exercised unilaterally or through executive action. However, these powers are still constrained by the Constitution and, in some cases, by judicial review. Here are the key powers that the president can exercise without the direct involvement of Congress. Executive orders are directives issued by the president to manage the operations of the federal government. These orders can be used to direct the actions of federal agencies, enforce existing laws, or set policy on matters within the executive branch's purview. Executive orders have the force of law, but they must align with the Constitution and existing statutes. For example, Executive Order 9981, issued by Harry Truman in 1948, desegregated the military. Another example is Executive Order 9066, issued by Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1942, which authorized the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. The president has the power to grant pardons to individuals convicted of federal crimes. A pardon eliminates or reduces the legal consequences of a conviction. A commutation, on the other hand, reduces a person's sentence without overturning the conviction. This power applies only to federal offenses, not state crimes. The president's pardon power is virtually unlimited, except for cases of impeachment. For instance, Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon for any crimes related to the Watergate scandal. As the commander-in-chief, the president has control over the U.S. military, including the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. While only Congress can declare war, the president can direct military operations, deploy troops, and take emergency military actions without a declaration of war or congressional approval. This has been exercised in military interventions, conflicts, and peacekeeping missions. For instance, the Korean War and Vietnam War were initiated by presidents without a formal declaration of war from Congress. Another example is the 1999 NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, which was authorized by President Bill Clinton without congressional approval. Veto power. The president has the power to veto bills passed by Congress, preventing them from becoming law. The veto can be overridden by a two-thirds majority in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. This power allows the president to reject legislation but does not require Congress's consent for the veto. However, Congress can still override the veto with enough votes. For example, President Obama vetoed the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, or JASTA, in 2016, though Congress later overrode the veto. Appointments. The president has the power to appoint federal officials, including Supreme Court justices, federal judges, cabinet members, ambassadors, and other top officials in the executive branch. While appointments require Senate confirmation, except for certain positions like White House staff, the president can make these appointments without needing congressional action. The president can also appoint individuals to temporary positions during recesses of the Senate, known as recess appointments, though these are temporary and may be subject to later Senate approval. For instance, when the Senate is in recess, the president can make recess appointments to fill vacant federal positions without immediate Senate approval. Foreign affairs powers. The president has the power to negotiate and sign treaties with foreign nations, although these must be ratified by a two-thirds majority of the Senate. However, the president can use executive agreements which do not require Senate approval for many international agreements. These executive agreements are typically used for less formal agreements on trade, defense, and other issues. The president also has the authority to formally recognize foreign governments and engage in diplomatic relations with them without congressional approval. For example, the Iran nuclear deal was an executive agreement made by President Obama without a Senate treaty vote. Another example is the U.S. recognizing the legitimacy of the People's Republic of China in 1979. Emergency powers. The president can exercise a range of emergency powers in times of national crisis, such as war, economic collapse, or natural disaster. These powers can include the suspension of certain civil liberties, the mobilization of resources, and the imposition of martial law. Some emergency powers are codified in law, while others are derived from the president's inherent powers. For example, the use of the National Emergencies Act to declare national emergencies, like President Trump declaring a national emergency at the US-Mexico border in 2019. In wartime, presidents have used emergency powers to control the economy and resources. During World War II, Franklin D. Roosevelt used emergency powers to direct industry and ration goods. Agenda setting. The president can address Congress and the nation annually in the State of the Union speech, where they set forth their policy agenda. While this doesn't have the force of law, it can influence public opinion and push Congress to act. The president can publicly propose new policies or budget priorities, which can shape the legislative agenda even without Congress's active participation. Control over executive agencies. The president has the authority to direct the agencies within the executive branch to carry out policies, enforce laws, and take action on specific issues, such as regulating environmental standards, healthcare policies, or immigration enforcement. For example, executive actions like the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, established by President Obama, were created through administrative discretion in the enforcement of immigration laws. 10. Convene or adjourn Congress. This is a limited power. The president can convene Congress in special sessions or adjourn it if the two chambers cannot agree on when to adjourn. This power is rarely used but provides the president with some leverage over Congress. For example, President Harry Truman used this power in 1948 to summon a special session to address labor disputes.
Breaking news.
11. Inherent powers. The president's inherent powers stem from the executive's duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, as stated in Article 2 of the Constitution. These powers are not explicitly listed but are inferred from the president's role as the head of the executive branch. The scope of these powers allows the president to act in ways necessary to carry out his constitutional duties, especially in times of national emergency or when responding to unforeseen challenges. For instance, Abraham Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War was based on the president's inherent powers to preserve national security. 12. Crisis management. In times of national crisis, whether caused by war, terrorism, or natural disasters, the president has a central role in managing the situation. They can deploy federal resources, direct agencies to take action, and make high-stakes decisions, such as ordering military responses or declaring a national emergency. Conclusion. While the president can exercise significant powers on their own, these powers are still bound by checks and balances. Congress and the judiciary can review or limit the president's actions, and some presidential powers, such as vetoes or appointments, are subject to congressional action. Nonetheless, a president can shape policy and act decisively without Congress in certain areas, particularly in the realms of foreign policy, national security, and executive governance.